Hey everybody, this is Professor Johnson. Thanks so much for your creation of our chart depicting some of the major streams of management thought over the course of the 20th century. You did a great job capturing all those different elements that I asked for in the chart. We'll spend more time with that chart next week on Wednesday. You notice there's no new class prep for Wednesday, so we'll continue our conversation about Hardy Chapter 4. But I wanted to just give you make some general observations about themes that move through this whole examination of 20th century management thought. So you started with Taylor, and it's interesting, with Taylor and scientific management, we really begins this whole struggle that we have as management students and as managers and leaders with trying to figure out how do we reconnect what was taken apart by scientific management. So when we look at Taylor, what used to be a holistic view of work or a whole piece of work was really disassembled and taken apart. And you do a good job, the folks that had the Taylor piece do a good job of talking about why that was in the chart that was created online. But our holistic view of work is disassembled. We have a division of labor to the extreme and the resulting problems. And so really the rest of the theorists are trying to figure out how do we put that stuff back together and yet maintain a certain level and indeed a high level of productivity for the organization. Because Taylor wanted that too, and as we've seen, or as we'll talk about on Wednesday, Taylor's motivations were not ill-advised. He wanted better working conditions, he wanted better relationship between managers and workers, and indeed he wanted to improve employee wages. But all of that didn't work out. We'll talk more about that on Wednesday. So then comes Elton Mayo and the Hawthorne experiments, etc., and you got to see how he sees some of the problems with scientific management and wants to figure out how to address those from a psychological perspective. And so he introduces human relations to this issue and says that relationships are important on the job. And again, we'll talk more about that on Wednesday. But he starts to approach that and says you cannot disassociate the human factors from the work. Then comes Chris Argyris, and he really looks at this problem from an organization level, not an individual level, but an organization level. And so when he's looking at this from the organization level, he's looking at how are organizations structured, and indeed are they structured in a way that honors who people are. Indeed, does it honor who adults are and how they think and how they can act and react and communicate and collaborate with one another. He says, in essence, that organizations are treating people like children, and therefore they get the results that they might expect when children are unhappy. And so he argues that we need to start treating people like adults and treat them in a way that honors their rational thought capabilities. Then we go to Frederick Hertzberg and his colleagues, and they come up with this motivator hygiene theory that the online group did a good job capturing. And so now we have, he says there are things that motivate people at work to perform well, and there are also things that at best are just satisfiers. If those things aren't present, they can cause dissatisfaction. If the motivators aren't present, they don't cause dissatisfaction, they just cause no satisfaction and no motivation, and therefore that can be problematic. So Hertzberg is the first to start applying, in some ways, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He divides it up a little bit differently, but he applies some of Maslow's work to the workplace and begins to look at how can employee productivity be improved by focusing on these things called motivators. So a couple years later then, Douglas McGregor comes along with his Theory X and Theory Y. Again, the online group did a great job outlining what are the differences between Theory X and Theory Y. But he says that this issue of motivating people at work and worker productivity is really an issue of how managers view people. Do they view people as Theory X, as basically lazy, uninterested in work, and will do everything they can to get out of work? Or do they view workers as intrinsically motivated and interested in working? And if you view people as through Theory Y, then McGregor says you're going to treat them differently, and you're going to engage them differently, and indeed you're going to have a more productive workforce. So up to this point, up to McGregor, everybody's goal here is to figure out how do we get more productivity out of the organization to the benefit of the organization. Drucker is the first person in our series of people that we're reviewing here to really look at this from a more individual perspective and say, who is it or what is it that we can do that will both honor the worker and honor the business? And what if we look at the people who comprise the organization as individuals who have intrinsic worth in and of themselves beyond the role they perform for this organization? And what then, if we view them that way, what responsibilities do we have as managers and business owners to take them and develop them for their benefit as well as the business's benefit? So he begins to look at the value of people beyond the roles they perform for the organization. And then finally, Robert Levering takes this a little bit further. And Levering was not a academic or a business theorist or a manager. He was actually a journalist. But as you'll see, and we'll spend some time with his work over the next couple of weeks, you'll see that he spends a lot of time trying to understand what's going on in the workplace. And he comes up with this idea that trust, pride, and camaraderie are key and central to worker motivation and productivity, and that a more democratic workplace is central to making a place a great place to work. So we start with Taylor and his disassembly of work, and then it brings us to Levering, where he is essentially talking about putting work back together in meaningful ways that has value for both the worker and the organization. So that's what we'll be spending more time on Wednesday, and indeed we will continue this conversation when we work with the Great Place to Work model here over the next few weeks. So thanks again for your participation online. We will work more on Wednesday. Have a great long weekend.